It's very interesting that the Mathrubhumi festival of letters is called the festival of letters and not literature. Because when you say literature, you define something. When we use the word literature, it comes loaded with a context. It comes loaded with the whole politics of canonization. And therefore, Festival of Letters is more fluid. It's in a sense that which I think as a post-colonial nation state, we can also relate much to, because then you don't have a Shakespeare or a Dante or the the grand narratives of canonization really pinning you down and saying that this is what literature is and that which is not. Or why only damn the Western world for canonizing it? Even within India, we have a certain degree of politics when it comes to what is a masterpiece, what are classics, and so on and so forth. So I deliberately am making this prelude because when one talks about social media, we talk about this kind of a very reactionary, extremely fluid, very, very disruptive, to the point of being violent narrative, which is dominating the public space. And like many writers and like many activists who believe that nothing in this world is apolitical, I too believe in that. So therefore, it's important to discuss social media within the political realm. In India, and I wouldn't want to talk of a global stage because I believe that as a country we have immense problems and complexities and diversities of our own to really bother about what's happening in the other corners of the world. Though we might want to draw parallels and we might be seduced into reading the post-Trump world and making parallels back home. I think it's important for us to understand how it all began in India. 2013 was the time when BJP used social media very aggressively as a mode of campaign. And I think as much as we would like to disagree with the kind of politics, with the shade of ideology, or whatever the BJP represents, I think this whole opening up of a discourse to a more larger audience, the power of a youth sitting in Chikmagalur or the power of a youth sitting in the cut-off area of Malkangiri, which is one of the most Naxal-affected areas of the country, the power of social media in making him get his voice heard to the Naxal supporters in the JNU or to the Naxal ideology proponents in, say, Bhubaneswar for that matter, is something which has really flattened the discourse. And I think this is an aspect which is perhaps always missed when one wants to wax eloquent about how rabid the discourse has become, how violent we have become as a nation, that we're not able to speak beyond abuses. The question which I, as a woman who comes from a rural family, who comes from a lower middle class rural family from Nalanda in Bihar asks is, why shall we not behave the way we behave? Because there was a certain kind of legitimacy in the other kind of behavior that was canonized, that was recognized, that was given a certain kind of legitimacy with being ascribed labels that made you get into literature festivals, for instance, that made you write editorials which did not consider our point of view. Now, when I say all these things, I think that the audience also needs a disclaimer. I am not just a writer. I am an activist too. I work for the ideology of cultural civilizational nationalism in the Northeast. And my project essentially entails the politics of the Northeast. So for all the campaigns that the BJP is doing in the Northeast and its expansionist project, as many intellectuals like to call it, I'm a central and core part of that team. And I want to make this disclaimer because I don't want to represent a certain set of people who are violent on social media. But I do want to give a perspective which sort of explains where that anger, that vengeance, that reactionary politics comes from. And it is important for us to understand as a nation, because when today we are talking about democratization of space, when we are really discussing and talking about concepts and debating actually the idea of nationalism in the very first place, I think it's important to get all kinds of perspectives heard and discussed. Social media as a medium, it has not only democratized the entire discourse, I think it has also done something fundamentally disruptive to the world we inhabit, which is to challenge definitions. I'll take up a very recent case, and since we are in the land of Kerala, let's take up a case which recently happened in the QSEC campus. I'm sure most of you would know of it. Some of the North Indian students in the QSEC university claimed that the faculty members, especially the principal of the college, which they claim has a very specific kind of political leaning towards the ruling establishment and dispensation of Kerala, in collusion with those people who sort of disagreed with the politics of these North Indian students, manipulated them into eating beef. Now these are students who come from families who have a huge taboo around food. They don't, beef is not, it's not really an act that they could be proud of. So after the consumption of beef, apparently most of them felt really embarrassed. They couldn't talk to their family members back home. Some of them slipped into depression. They were not talking to the outside world. They had completely shut themselves in. That's when I got a call from a couple of them saying that, Didi, what can we do and what should we do? We are really scared. When I dug a little more into what really happened, one realized that they apparently wanted to hold Saraswati Puja in the campus, and there was a huge uproar that you can't do this. And their version is that as a reaction to that, this kind of manipulation happened. Now, I work in the Northeast. Northeast is an area where people consume beef. It's a part of the dietary habit. I come from a family of Gau Rakshaks and Gau Sevaks. My mother and my grandmother still have 2 cows, and we have always maintained 2 cows at home who are worshipped every day. We do not consume food till the Gau Mata actually has food made in the house. So for me to be able to transcend these cultural implications and be able to put myself in the shoes of these students was fairly easier. But when I looked at the media discourse around beef, I found that when Mr. Modi went to Meghalaya to campaign for the elections, an Indian Express journalist puts out a story which reads, the headline reads, "Now Meghalaya can consume beef as Mr. Modi goes to campaign in the Northeast." This is a media narrative, ladies and gentlemen, which is problematic. It is problematic because it feeds into the beef politics as we have reduced the discourse to. And how does it do so? We all know that in India, beef is not banned, as most of people would like you to believe. India as a multicultural, multilingual, multi-civilizational, multi-religious identity has always accepted different points of view. That has been our tradition of Shastrarth. Communism as well as civilizational nationalism have thrived. Actually, people on ground in the Naxal affected areas, the Gandhian groups, the communist groups, some of them actually work together. The people with real conviction, not people with ideological leanings to just put forward a point of view or an ideology. People who really want to do good to the tribals, they worked together and made immense differences in the lives of many. The point is that when you shove down a narrative like that through a headline, which is a very, and in a newspaper which is really respected, and a newspaper which is sort of glamorized as the version of truth, you are not only distorting realities, you are communalizing the entire narrative. What did Isha Roy sitting in Kolkata mean when she said Meghalaya can now consume beef? Meghalaya has been consuming beef ever since. What was the politics behind this headline? And I ask this question because the moment this kind of headline happens, the North Indian students the South Indian students in the QSEC University who sparred and battled with the North Indian students get affected. They think there is really a saffron ideology which is trying to dictate this country into something which should not happen. My question is, who communalized the narrative here? Who brought in an issue which was not even an issue? And why, as aware citizens who believe in letters, who believe in literature, who believe in nuances, who believe in art, who believe in appreciating the finer truth, the layers and layers of realities which lie within one narrative, never question these stalwarts who prefer to sit in Kolkata to cover the entire northeast region? That is a question I think we as a society need to answer. But till the time this grand society which believes in all these nuances and which likes to talk and wax eloquent about nuances happen, there is social media where a youth or a tribal person affected by this kind of politics can open a Twitter account with an anonymous handle, control you left, right and center, call out your lies and make you feel ashamed of the kind of work you've done. Now that comes with a peril, because this anonymous handle can also get you death threats. So how do we as a society understand the power of this and yet be aware of the pitfalls of this kind of disruption in narrative? I think that as a that is a very important question that we as Indians today we face. Now, is it the first time that India is going through this phase of churning? No, we have gone through this kind of churning since decades and eons ago. As a civilization, as much as one would want to believe that India as a nation state came in 1947, I come from an ideological school of thought which believes that, well, that was a geographical international entity. India as a nation state did come in 1947, but India as a civilization, India as a nation per se, has existed for far beyond. So when you see a temple in Thailand or Cambodia and you come back to Manipur and you see the same replica of temple designs, you feel that there is a far larger connect that needs to be explored, that has not been explored for politics at large, which has mostly been dominated by a certain kind of ideology who does not want us to go back in time. It considers going back, revisiting history as regressive, without any understanding or without any justification of why it is regressive to understand where we come from. Why it is cool to read Pablo Neruda to understand multiple layers of identity, but it is uncool to pick up a books in regional literature and study that to understand where we come from. The reason why my tone became a little disparaging towards the West when I began was because I, as a post-colonial product, has not really made peace with the fact that the kind of ideological nourishment that one got with the English, predominantly Eurocentric way of education, I have not been able to make peace with that, because that is an education which has really not made me understand the tribal world, has not made me understand the today's coinage, the Dalit, so-called Dalit world, the way I should have understood. What was shoved down my throat was a certain version of Dalit narrative, which was very, very reactionary in the late 60s and the late 70s. I wanted to go back to what the Dalit writers said, but what I encountered was an Ambedkar, and what the voice that was ciphered was that of a woman who was the only woman in the Constituent Assembly, a Dalit woman who challenged Ambedkar. But how many of us in the curriculum read about her, read of her? I think social media gives us a platform to sort of vent this out in the way we want to. Now, since one is sitting here, one will have to adhere to certain codes of conduct, as one does when one is sitting in a classroom or sitting in a civilized, polite world. But in the world where there is an anonymity, you always tend to take chances. The example of that being, I can see a lot of young people in the audiences. When in college, the lights used to go off for no rhyme or reason. People used to scream, screech and say the vilest of abuses for no good damn reason. It was just fun to scream, shout and abuse. So that kind of anonymity, that kind of existence yet non-existence that social media provides is a very, very powerful, very, very disruptive, but very, very interesting tool that one needs to negotiate with. What can be the reaction to this? In order to understand that, let's understand what has been the reaction to this. Now, the stalwarts whose narratives have started being challenged have started dismissing social media as a world which has started creating a post-truth world where only lies thrive. Yes, that is a reality, and I do not agree, and I do not disagree with it. Of course, there are all kinds of rumors on social media which are spread. But is that only it? As students or appreciators of literature, do we limit our understanding of literature to just what the teller is saying, or do we read the tale as well? Why have we forgotten to read between the lines? Why is it only important for us to negotiate with what is happening on social media and not important for us to see why whatever is being said is said in the way it is being said? I'll give another example. Yesterday I was at the Orissa Literature Festival where there were 4 or 5 writers from representing tribal communities of India. They came from the northeast, they came from Orissa, they also came from parts of Andhra. They all sat together and all of them were poets, and they said that we would not read our translated work. We would read our work in the language we wrote that in. And let's see whether the audience can grasp or understand it. The audience did. I could see that a Turkish poet who was sitting out there actually had tears in his eyes. I walked up to him and I had a conversation with him later, asking what really he grasped out of it. He said nothing much. The whole point was that the way in which the poetry was recited, the way in which the words unfolded themselves, it made me connect back home to certain memories. Today we are living in a world of social media where these are not even words. These are wild, sometimes nasty, sometimes overtly emotional expressions. Where a woman, I remember this woman who actually said when the whole Vande Matram discourse was sort of raging in the country, and she said that I was about to deliver my triplets. I was in immense pain, and suddenly from somewhere I heard Vande Matram being played, and I found a certain sense of maternal comfort in that. She was trolled, abused, she was given the choicest of abuses for just saying that. Why have we lost as a nation the empathy to listen to these sounds? These are not even poetry. These are sounds which are very direct. These are letters which are very direct, which are calling out lies, which are saying that you are not doing your job, and it is happening across the spectrum. I'm not trying to build a case for the purported right wing trying to troll and trying to justify what it is doing. It's also from the other side. That when an Isha Roy writes that article with a misleading headline, she needs to be understood too. Why is she writing the way she's writing? The point is, why are we as a culture losing that nuance? Why are we as a culture so diffident to confronting realities the way it has to be confronted? I go for a lot of panel discussions on television, and I'm not known to be as calm and as poised as, as I sound right now. Perhaps, I hope I'm sounding calm and poised right now, but the way in which certain kind of discourses are shoved down the throat, it has the potential to really piss someone off, for the lack of a better word. And these are people who do not have access to the 9 to time prime time slot, where they can artistically blacken a screen and present one side of the narrative. And let us agree that this, and I would love to engage with the audience as well on this. If you do not have a legitimate right to present your case the way the other side is doing, you will find your own ways to negotiate with reality. For example, the kind of violence that was meted out to an entire generation of the African population. And when we read the post-apartheid literature, we see the kind of resistance within that writing. Let's come back home. Let's look at the kind of poetry that Namdev Dhasal wrote. the kind of abuses that was put out there, the pain of a Dalit writer who could not bring himself to the polite articulation of the pain that he felt. If today he were writing on social media, he would be labeled a troll. But he was not a troll. He produced one of the finest pieces of activist literature that one could read. The point is, I think we really need to be democratic. I really wish that our democracy encompasses different points of views, and not only in a token kind of a way where you have 5 discussants in a television studio giving one version of a Gauri Lankesh story, and there is just one person from the Sangha Parivar who has to sort of take all of them on, where the anchor herself or himself tries to take side with the rest 4. I think that is very unfair. Also, given the facts of the case now, that not the Sangha Parivar, but unfortunately, because the kind of a polarized world that we are living in, unfortunately a member from the minority community, as one would like to say, has been really brought to task in that case. I think we lost the debate and the moral of that debate in that very confession. The kind of confession that we did on prime time slots, in different kinds of editorials, in the different kind of selective outrage we did on Gauri Lankesh, reflected more on us as a society than what happened to Gauri Lankesh. I think with this I would really like to open up the floor for questions and engagements. And I would like to just put a disclaimer, this is not the only version of truth. I completely understand that. I completely understand that there are multiple other versions which need to be negotiated with. And I'm really, really open to accepting any other kind of explanation that one might have.
Thank you, ma'am. Now the session is open for discussion. Any questions, please?
Hello.
Hi.
More convincing to hear you rather than looking at the facts what media wants to bring. My open question is, how does Press Trust of India look into such matters?
How does the Press Trust of India?
Press Trust of India look into such matters?
Since I've worked with the media before, and I know some of the people who are working in the PTI today, I don't think it matters to them. I think it's an ideological war out there. That is my limited explanation of things at the moment.
I expected this answer. In that matter, if PTI is not working on it, how does different media culture themselves? These days we have many big names coming on. How these people want to represent the fact as such?
May I know your name, please?
Pooja Chaturvedi.
Okay. Pooja, when I talk about the media, I used to bash the media like most trolls, right-wing trolls did on Twitter or Facebook. But I think the more I delved deeper into the question, thanks to my assignments in the Northeast, I realized that media is not a monolithic entity. Media has a corporate side to it. Media has an ideological editorial side to it. And media has people like you and me who are actually working on ground, whose stories will not get reported because now I'm branded as a right wing. Media also has those regional journalists who are never consulted before an article is churned out. So for example, if a narrative has to be built on some event that happens in Trivandrum today, there would be very few regional writers from, for example, even Mathrubhumi who would make to the Hindu. There would be people sitting in Delhi assuming that they know everything about Kerala, dishing out a piece, trying to prove themselves as the most intellectual voice on that particular issue. So I think this non-democratization of the media space is a problem that has to be dealt with. Now, will the PTI deal with it? As I said in the beginning, we are living as millennials, as you know, one of the definitions of people of our age is also that of being a millennial. Why should we even give a damn to what the PTI does? Today, with social media, you can open up a whole platform where you challenge these narratives, these facts, with counterfacts, with reality. And that is being done. There are a lot of these sites which are doing it. Recently, just 3 days ago, I read a fantastic piece on NTR at rightlog.in. So I think media as an entity has also been over-glamorized and over-emphasized by, I think, the same set of people, because they don't want to get hold of that narrative. So even if there's a protest, there's a voice of protest coming in from within, they want to appropriate that space so that the protest doesn't go out of hand. That's why I said there's a bigger war out there. There was as much as, I mean, I have, of course, one has condemned, and I have openly condemned the killing of Gauri Lankesh, because she was, and the inside information that I have is she was doing the fantastic story on explaining the mining mafia in Karnataka, which is why there were a lot of bureaucrats and etc. who were after her, and there might be an angle to that story as well. She was working with the Naxals very closely, and people from the Sangha Parivar, people I know from the Sangha Parivar, have showed me pictures where they were actually venerated her for the kind of work she has done. Now, media wouldn't want you to portray that, because that is a side of Sangh which is very humane. That is a side of Sangh which doesn't fit into the saffron terror bracket. So, the point that I'm trying to make is that we need to look beyond what is said. We need to be actual researchers, hit the ground and figure out where is the real truth. And we might not come up with all dimensions of it, but we'll definitely come up with a version which is not Delhi-centric.
Any more questions?
As in Karnataka, from drinking water down to forest or sandalwood mafia, Kerala is full of the notorious activities of mafia. But this is not at all brought out in the literature that is currently produced in Kerala. Could you suggest any reasons for this?
Sir, it might sound a little outrageous, but I think most of the literature that we read today are appropriated literature. The literature most of the literature that is being churned out is a reaction to or a response to the kind of political dispensation we have. So either you have a Manu Joseph who writes a novel where he caricatures a particular woman in a khaki shorts, or you have writers who, as you said, do not discuss reality the way it should be discussed. So I don't know what's wrong with the literary world at large. We don't even want to, forget about writing, sir, we don't even want to publish writers. My book was censored for so many reasons. I had to rebrand my book to be able to tell the story I wanted to tell. And today it is the bestseller, which again the media doesn't want to highlight. Even the publishers don't want to highlight that fact. So I think it's more than a crisis in creating the written word. I think it's the crisis of the society that we are a part of. I think it's a huge intellectual, moral, political, ideological churning that we are going through. And with all due respect to the writers, I think that they're not willing to be a part of that process. They want to be stuck in a time zone where a certain kind of narrative was appreciated. For example, the feminist literature in this country is stuck in this very urban elite milieu, where we see a Swara Bhaskar, an artist in her own right, and I respect her for her acting skills, but she writes a 2400-word piece damning the entire film just because she felt reduced to a vagina, without even understanding the context. And as students of literature, the first thing we are told is contextualize the piece. The first thing we are told is trust the tale, not the teller. But somehow I don't know why are we losing these basic nuances of reading, of writing, of even understanding the world at large.
Next. So as this is the case, ma'am, may I have a question to you?
Sure.
Ma'am, you've discussed that the case in QSET where a boy or the students were manipulated to have beef. So India is also the land where men are slaughtered for having beef, ma'am. So what is your comment on that?
It's absolutely abominable. It's something which forget about the language, I wouldn't even use the language of should not, it's criminal. And the person should be brought to task. The point is not about, cherry picking selective cases and trying to build a case, as I am making it very clear throughout my presentation or throughout my conversation. What I'm just trying to say is that we need to look at the nuance. Yes, it was wrong that an akhlaq was killed, but it was also wrong that a Chandan was killed. But there was no poetry written on Chandan. There was not even one editorial in the Indian Express which said a boy called Chandan. And you know the kind of, I'm sure you would know the kind of headlines that were used to even describe that lynching, that public mob lynching, just because he chose to say Vande Matram. And actually the district administrator came up with this bizarre argument saying, well, he should not have provoked people from the minority community in a Muslim dominated area. As if in India, the Mathrubhumi that we have, the Mathrubhumi festival that we are organizing, tomorrow should be slaughtered into pieces, saying that, well, this is a minority dominated space where only minority literature should be discussed and will not discuss Dalit literature. I mean, that sort of delineation is something which I really can't get a hang of. If the organizers of that event where beef was apparently served, and I'm not even saying that there was a manipulation done. What I'm saying is, this is a version from the students who suffered. Are we ready to negotiate with that version is the limited question that I'm asking. I'm not saying the administration was at fault. I'm not making a blanket statement. But I still waited for that principal to write one editorial. For all his grandstanding on issues, did he ever come out in the open and write that one piece saying that no, if it happened, it was not supposed to be done? This sense of muting of information, this sense of muting of our response, this sense of saying things just for the sake of it. Sudeep Bhaumik was a journalist who was killed in Tripura. You know why? Because he stood up against the communist regime and wanted to write about the atrocities done by the Communist Party run by Manik Sarkar against the tribals. The entire tribal community in Tripura is looked at as a terrorist. That's the narrative that's being built. And what happened to Sudeep Bhaumik? He was killed. Did you even see one outrage in the media regarding that? When activists like us actually went on Twitter and asked people to do it, there was one conference which was done in the press club attended by 5 people. So we need to understand that as a nation, the kind of questions that you ask, the kind of responses that you get, it's all happening in a context. It's not happening in a decontextualized, ideal world of shadow lines.
Thank you, ma'am. Any more questions? Okay.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
As she pointed out, it was just a background of my question raising in my mind.
Right.
So I would put it in this way, like I am a civil service aspirant, and when we were studying about the policies and schemes which the government put forward after the Modi government came into power, I was actually astonished or surprised, because it's a huge development. What do we call? It's a huge movement that's going on by the government to uplift the community or the nation as such. But when we were discussing about this fact as a part of discussions, what came into the picture was like, as a nation as a whole, if a particular community or if a particular segment of people are particularly insecure about their identity, isn't it a huger crisis? As a nation, if we look at it, or as a whole, India as a whole, if we take it, if a particular people, if a particular sector of a people, or segment of a people,
you can name the communities, because my book, basically one of the cases which I build in the book, and because we are young individuals,
okay,
we need to really do away with this nonsense of political correctness, all right? Because the moment we again put that tag of political correctness, there are certain things which are censored. We can't talk about it. We are a democracy. We are not in fascist or communist regimes. We can discuss about the Muslim community who feels insecure.
No, the only reason why I am not mentioning the Muslim community as such is that this continues. As you said, in the communist regime, it was a Hindu or he was speaking against the communist regime. So why I am naming it as a particular community is that this continues. This time it is Muslims. And when the years go by, it might be another community. I am speaking about the insecurity the
Citizen
citizens
feels.
feel. Yeah. So isn't that a huger concern?
Of course it is.
Yeah. And how do we address that? And while celebrating this development propaganda or such, why do we tend to minimize this particular concern of a citizen of India?
Okay. Since you have many layers to your question, if I'm not able to address any, please butt in and ask me to hold me accountable. What's your name? Omar. So, Omar, it's very interesting that the way you phrase the entire question, because I think that is an opening up of a discourse that has happened now. It did not happen like, say, 6 months ago. People did not want to talk about, people had this fixated the idea of victimization on certain communities, specifically the Muslim community. Yes, you are right, this is a huger crisis. But the point of the matter is, Omar, that there is an India which exists beyond newspapers, which is not feeling the kind of crisis that is being portrayed as. People still live, I work, basically my Karm Bhumi is the land of Azan Fakir in Assam. Assam as a demography, and we all know the kind of migration that has happened there, illegal migration that has happened from Bangladesh, which has sort of torn the entire political, discourse into a tizzy, and people have extreme positions, so on and so forth. Still, as an entity in its own right, Assam is not a communalized society. It is a polarized society for sure, but it is not communalized. And I think this is a difference, this is a nuance which all of us have been made to miss out on deliberately again by the media. And I'll tell you how. Because as we were discussing the whole, the case in QSEC, and we were discussing these various cases, why is it that we do not make it a criminal offense for a newspaper to say that a Muslim man was killed by a Hindu mob? But when an opposite happens, it's always a man was killed by a group of men. This is a problem, this is not just a small problem. This is a problem where you're psychologically molding the entire nation into believing that there is this one community which is constantly being victimized. And I'm not saying it is not happening. What I'm saying is violence is being meted out at both the corners. For example, political killings in Kerala. Again, it's a point which is being discussed across the aisle, and we know for a fact that it's two-sided. It's not a one-sided narrative. But only when we recognize that it is happening, only when we do not mute that information, will we be able to say that, well, law and order is as a constitution, and you're a student of a civil services aspirant, law and order is in the constitution is a state subject. Why is the Kerala government not coming up with a white paper which says, well, these were the people killed on our side, these were the people killed on your side, this is the status report, these were the FIRs filed, this is where we have progressed on the case, these are the number of criminals I have nabbed. So then I would like to believe that in this grander war of ideologies and so on and so forth, there are more vested interests at stake, perhaps from the editorial guild as well, who wants this entire politics to continue, who doesn't want that the development propaganda, as you put it, is shown in the right light. I was in Dantewada 4 months ago. I'm working on after the whole 50 years of the communist movement, I wanted to revisit these lands and figure out what exactly is the situation. Because most of the tribal literature, is dominated by the communist ideology. So when I hit the ground, I realized that the versions of what communism is for a tribal, for a Tendupatta seller, for a tribal who has an Aadhaar card and who is able to get that ration from the government, and is then at the risk of being killed, is actually given to the Naxals. So the government, of course, is in collusion with it, and not just this government, it was happening since the previous government. So where are we headed as a nation? Who will tell these stories? Where are the real journalists? And if there are none, we have social media, where are the social media warriors? Why can't we move beyond outraging as to what a Rajdeep Sardesai or a Sagarika Ghosh or a Nidhi Razdan or a Ravish Kumar says, to saying, well, you didn't say it, but I'm giving you this story. Did I miss out on anything?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
So my question is that when you speak that when you tell that you are denouncing the Western ideas or imposition that is that we are made to study and all that through our education and everything. So but at the same time you are telling that we should have our own discourses. We should in the Indian rooted in the Indian tradition.
Right.
At the same time, that what BJP is trying to do or the political ideology they have is not looking at any of these nuances. Instead, they are also trying to put just one, just one variant of it, and not even, they are not looking at any of the nuances, regional nuances or anything, and they're just trying to portray a single portrayal of it. And also that I would also disagree with what you said about Assam. I studied in Assam. For 3 years I was there. And what I felt was that Assam is a very communalized society. I mean, if you walk in the street, you can feel that sense of otherness that, that, I mean, in the, that towards the Muslim community, And also, I mean, I don't know that, I mean, what kind of project, a cultural project that BJP will have on Northeast, because Northeast, if you see it, it's a completely different kind of society where, that if you look at
compressed India, mini India in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, what I meant was that if you look at the beginning of the Naga nationalism and all, it was Naga Indian nationalism was something that is shoved down the throat of Nagas, by threat of force. So I mean, and years of persecution and all that, and I mean, how does the cultural project of India, how does it fit in that Northeast perspective? So these are my two questions.
You have asked 4 or 5 questions, very large ones, so large that each of them merit the writing of a book. But I'll try and address all of them. Please, again, hold me accountable if I don't. I'll go because Northeast is close to my heart. That's my current bhumi. I'll begin with the Northeast. While I agree with you that there is an antagonism towards in Assam towards the Muslim community, I would disagree with you that it is towards all Muslims. Vasbir Hussain, who is a journalist, a very veteran, I'm sure you know about him, a very veteran, a very renowned journalist, even in the left circles, told me a very interesting thing, which again is a part of the narrative which I build in the book. In Assam, the talk is not about Hindu-Muslim. In Assam, the talk is about ethnic versus non-ethnic Muslims. They've always maintained that we come from a parampara of Azan Fakir and Srimanta Shankardev. So it is, we cannot have a unilateral identity. They have a problem with the illegal migrants from Bangladesh who are coming with the agenda of Gajwai Hind. That, yeah. No, that is again a part of history which was muted. No. Right from 1920 onwards, the migration from Bangladesh, see, one has to understand why did migration happen in the very first place. Migration happened because labor from Bangladesh was much cheaper than labor in Assam. We know of that reality, right? So the problem started when the community started becoming majority in particular areas, and the Assamese felt that it was a threat to their culture. Now that is again a very contested claim, and you can say, but well, they are a part of your culture, so assimilation of that culture and all of that, and therefore the whole idea of Azan Fakir is not just stuck in time that there was an Azan Fakir and a Srimanta Shankardev in XYZ century. We should limit our understanding of Assam to that. No, it stands even today. The problem is the specific, I'll tell you specific constituencies where Badruddin Ajmal and the entire polarized, communalized gang operates. Those 38 constituencies is a threat that an average Assamese in the streets of Guwahati faces. If we are very specific about it, we don't want to create a situation where we are not able to venture out in our own lands because it becomes sinful. They find it problematic when a villager wakes up in the morning and finds his entire field inundated with illegal migrants. These are realities. You come from Assam, you know these are realities which confront that state. Now, what Vasbir Hussain said is very interesting. What he told me was, Shubhrastha, the problem is not communalization. If you go and ask an average Muslim man in Guwahati today or in Assam today, who is an ethnic Assamese, and you tell, would you want to marry a Muslim from Mumbai? He would prefer a Hindu girl from Assam than a Muslim girl from Bombay. That is our culture. That is the claim to history or the claim to culture that we talk about. So I think we need to, I think this narrative again that is being constantly built that it's a Hindu-Muslim divide in Assam, please do not put that North Indian cow-belt politics there. It is not. It is a much more nuanced version which has to be understood throughout the course of history. On the question of Naga nationalism, while I agree with you that the articulation of Naga nationalism is the articulation that even I read when I was in Delhi University, but only when one went there and then started living with the Nagas, and Nagaland is going to polls right now, one started understanding the kind of injustices that have been met out to them historically. Now, it is not, of course the whole, after the Britishers left, the way in which the country sort of reorganized into the whole it is today, has had its own share of pains, agonies, problems. But do we discuss and frame the entire narrative of nationalism within that rubric? Or do we open up the discourse a little more? Because again, as I said, a Meitei community in Manipur is very similar to communities in Cambodia. So there is always that culture, has always been that cultural link, just that it has not been mainstreamed. It has not been talked about. Similarly with the Naga question, the Naga, and we have read so many, the mythology of the Krishna has so many mentions of the Naga kings and the Naga queens. They were not Nags as represented by Balaji telefilms. Naga had a historical connection, a civilizational connection. So where and why did we fall prey to this post-colonial notion, colonial and post-colonial notion of the fact that there were always a sub-national streak in these states? There was not. At one point in time, and it was not just the Akhand Bharat which the Sangha talks about, is not a political project. It is a cultural belief in the idea that right from Kandahar to Java, Sumatra, Bali, we all were one culture, one civilization. And the more one goes out and comes and updates on Facebook, oh, I saw this temple, such striking similarities to XYZ place in India. That is the culture that one is talking about. So to answer your question on what is BJP's project, well, I'm not a spokesperson of the BJP, and I have problems with the BJP in many different ways, and I air it at various forums of my own choice, which I am not going to define here as to what those platforms are. That is my politics, as much as it is the politics of the communist to mute information. So, because I am also reactionary, I am also young. Whether BJP has a vision or not is a question that as citizens we'll have to see in the policy frameworks that, the policy statements that they bring. But whether RSS, the Sangha Parivar has an intent to do this is a question I'm convinced on. It does. Because if a person like me is able to work in the Sangha Parivar, is able to write a book, take out time to come to this festival in the middle of 3 state elections which are happening, I think there is a genuine intent to build that kind of an ecosystem, which is more liberal, which is more free from the noise of Northeast is a place of only violence and gore and rape and threats. There is a Northeast beyond what the media tells us. Did I answer all your questions? I forgot some.
May I have a question more, ma'am?
Sure.
Ma'am, India was a land or is a land of nuances of being a Hindu and a Muslim.
Absolutely.
But I witnessed that there is a major mess now of being a Hindu and a Muslim.
Yes.
Why is that so, ma'am? What is your comment on it?
I think because we have become really polarized as a nation. We have become really communalized as a nation. I believe in polarization. I believe in polarization where we take a stand and say that lynching is bad. And the entire society becomes polarized to demeaning a certain kind of crime. But why are we asserting certain kinds of, why is assertion of identity becoming really important today? Maybe because because the way in which we talked about identities was perhaps repressed for a long time. We were thrust with a certain idea of secularism without even the consent of the communities about whom and for whom these guys became the spokespersons of. For example, let's take the issue of triple talaq. When one talked about the victimization of Muslims, did you consider the plight of the Muslim women? For so long, this entire question was being negotiated. We actually discussed as a nation whether triple talaq is bad or not. We continue to discuss it even today whether it is bad or not, despite the fact that Islamic nations that we look down upon in terms of subjugation of women, they freaking banned it. But we as a nation just could not come to terms with that fact. So what I'm saying is that questions of identity are always vexed. Why are we as a nation why do we negotiate with this communal politics today? Cannot be understood stuck in time today with the coming of the BJP or the coming of the advent of the RSS. It has to be negotiated a little back in time with proper contexts in place.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes, sure, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm Radhakrishnan. I'm a Delhi University student. I studied in Delhi for 35 years. Then after that, I taught in Karnataka, Mangalore specifically, for 30 long years again. During this 6 decadal time, I never found any conflict between any group. Was I lucky? I don't know. Because there was no interference in Delhi University, because I was studying in Delhi University Zoology Department. Campus was beautiful, no problems at all. And of course, only one achievement I had is that bought a Punjabi along with me, girl. So that is because she told me, you speak such a Punjabi, I never knew you were a Keralite. Anyway, apart that, then I came and started teaching in South Canara. South Canara, as such, is a beautiful situation where there is crucible, but it doesn't boil. There are people from all over the way, and still it is very calm and quiet. Why is it so? Because there was no trigger. Is there a trigger necessary for a bomb to explode? But I never found that even anybody came anywhere trying to trigger. So it is, if you leave a leeway where such a thing can happen, it can happen. I'll give one more example. Then I came to Kerala, and for nearly 5 to 10 years I'm living. So I was in Manandawadi. I was close to a tribal colony. So there was no boundary. So I had a water tank, and I used to fill, and slowly I found that within 3 or 4 hours the tank is over. Then I again pump. Then I realized the entire colony is taking water from me. So one day an old woman said, Mone, ella vittunnu oru 20 rupees, 20 rupees I will gather and give you, is it okay with you? Because you are you have to spend money for us. I said no, because I knew the moment I do that, they will say this fellow is doing business. So I was very sure, because there was a road, and the other side of it there was usual Kerala shops and all that. They will keep looking at me, trying to take a trigger point. I never gave them money. So they even told, because I don't know that kind of Malayalam. Anyway, I said, what do you lose? I'm giving. So this is a thing which, if you magnify, if there is no triggering, like Delhi University, which I was talking about, and having taught for 30 years in Mangalore Fisheries College, I was very active, and students were very active. And in my class, there were Assamese. There were small incidents, and I could solve it out because I was close to the students. So, but why do you feel that the community is always ready to blast just because of a trigger? There are buffering agents, there are buffering possibilities, but we ignore those buffering aspects and then cry over a bomb which should not have exploded at all. Thank you.
Sir, I absolutely agree with you, and which is why I tried to stress on the fact, I tried to stress on the politics of narrative building. I wish we had a media, I wish we had an intellectual space where examples like you were mainstreamed, where examples like you were made the headlines, rather than XYZ was killed by XYZ. And the other thing is, sir, very rightly pointed out that you studied in zoology department and you never faced a problem like that. Somehow the humanities and the literature departments tend to become the spokespersons of the entire JNU or the entire DU. Forgetting that the NCC cadets, the army training also happens from the JNU. So, of course, there is a problem, this hegemonization of space and saying, well, we represent the JNU, as if the entire debate on nationalism can be discussed only through Umar Khalid or Kanhaiya Kumar.
They were generally marginalized because we had lot of avenues to express ourselves. like in zoology department was, there's nothing could happen because only 4 boys and the rest of them were girls.
Right.
So
And
that is one reason. But when you see the entire gamut of Delhi University, I never found that unless and until you have a leeway to into that structure.
True, true.
Students were perfectly all right, but people try to find a leeway into it, and if they don't get it, they don't do anything. It's only when you allow one step, they take another 2 large steps outside.
Absolutely.
So please stop that first step.
yes,
Then
I
you
agree.
will not have any of those things. That is because the structurization of the university in Delhi University, we did not allow any political speech, we did not allow any posters. Even in my college, Fisheries College for last 35 years, I did not allow a single poster
Yes.
in my college or a scribble on the wall. But when I am in Mandawadi, I go to, Sahitya Academy Hall, I put my photographic exam, etc. There is a commerce college there. It is full of buntings, CPI, CPM, this, that. I asked one of the teachers, Sare, ningal indina idellam agree cheyunnu. Ningalku onnum cheyidude idine. Why can't you not stop it? Engine sare stop here. He is dumbfounded. I said, you was the teacher. You should hold the sway of it and not that allow any XYZ party make you the again to do it. So that is where we have to find out to stop it.
Yes, and I missed out on one point, sir, when I began. The world that you lived in is the world that perhaps we should have been blessed to inherit. We should really have been humble enough to not shout back at the generation that you come from. That unfortunately, that culture is getting lost. But I think because we need to reclaim that culture where university campuses are not hyper politicized with what is happening in between the Congress and the BJP and the CPI and the CPIM, but campus politics is limited to concerns of the students. Of course, you be as political as you want, negotiate with ideas of identity, with LGBT, but do not get into the party politics mode. Let not an ISA show you the same movie over and over again to generations of students who come, which has happened in my case, sir. When I was studying, I graduated in 2009. And right from 2000, now when I look back at it in retrospect, 2009 to 2011, the same 3 movies which talked about the communist regime and the movement and how it came, the glamorization of it. Delhi University, Miranda House, English department. So, the same movies were shown over and over again to the same bunch of students came and gave lectures on it. So that is a problem with hyper-politicization, and I agree with you on that. And by the way, I wouldn't only speak from this side of the narrative. The other side of the narrative is that every time that happened, there used to be people who came and tore down the posters and created a ruckus and said, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. So yes, Bharat Mata Ki Jai for sure, Vande Matram for sure. But in the name of what? Why tear down a poster, create a movie which resurrects India as a glorious heritage? Show that movie as a response.